Welcome back to Huckabee and our special Republican Presidential Forum. Joining us now is former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. The first question comes from Pam Bondi.
Senator, you recently said in the Heritage Foundation foreign policy debate that in the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln ran over our civil rights. Are there any parts of the Patriot Act that you feel run over the rights of our citizens?
No, as a matter of fact.
Why?
I voted for the Patriot Act because most of the Patriot Act changes were consistent with what we were doing, for example, with drug kingpins and gangsters, if you will, and that were not applied because we had a different model. We weren't dealing with terrorism prior to the events of 9/11, so our law did not anticipate, having to broaden what were really criminal opportunities to be able to find out and intervene and tap and wiretap and use the tools that the more recent tools for finding out information and apply those to a terrorist setting. Now we had the opportunity to do so, and that's why I voted for it.
And how did Abraham Lincoln run over our civil rights?
Well, I mean, suspending habeas corpus, for example. I mean, that was certainly probably the biggest thing. But the president was dealing with an insurrection, and I don't think if you look back in history, he did what he had to do to try to hold the Union together. We're not in a situation like that where we have that kind of problem, but we do have problems here in our home soil, and we have to make sure that the laws comport with being able to find terrorists who are here and homegrown.
Thank you.
You bet.
Senator, I know that strengthening the family is important to you and it's important to us.
Yes, sir.
But is that a proper function in your perspective with respect to the federal government?
Well,
and if so, how?
Yeah, it is. I mean, as you know, Karen and I are the father and mother of 7 children. Family is very important to me, and it's very important to America. And we've seen a federal government that has undermined the family in a lot of ways. Just look at what we've done in some of our welfare programs. I'm sure a lot of folks listening here tonight are going to know people who father and mother are living together, but they're not married, and for the reason they're not married is so mother can receive welfare benefits to help support those children. We do things to actually break families apart with government aid. We do things to not encourage marriage. Those are things in the law. Obviously, we dealt for years with the marriage tax penalty that penalizes people to get married in the tax code. But there's things the president can do beyond passing laws and making sure that our laws conform to support the families. There's discussions we can have. I wrote a book called It Takes a Family because I care so much about it, and in that book I talked about a program in Chattanooga, Tennessee called First Things First. They found out that the divorce rate, the out-of-wedlock birth rate, and the number of single married mothers was the highest, or one of the highest, in the state of Tennessee. And they were appalled by that this was going on in their community. So what they did is they came together, and the nonprofits with businesses and with the education community, the government, and formed a group to actually go out and promote marriage, promote policies to reduce divorce. And it was a bipartisan effort led by leaders in the community, like a president can lead a revitalization of marriage and focusing on the issue of divorce without passing any laws. That's what the president can do. He has the power to convene, the power to start a national discussion, and it's an important power that's rarely used.
Where do the states fit in that with respect to welfare reform and the areas that you're talking about? Where do the states fit in that model with the federal government?
Yeah, as you know, I was actually the author of the federal welfare reform bill when I was in the House, and carried and managed the bill on the floor of the Senate when I was in the Senate, and it's the only time we've actually taken a federal program, eliminated it, a federal entitlement, and sent it back to the states. We need to do the same for food stamps. We need to do the same for Medicaid. We need to do the same for housing programs. We need to do the same for job training programs. All these programs are administered by the states right now, but they have this heavy federal component that really doesn't belong there. So the role for the states is to get back its proper role in taking care of the health and welfare of its citizens, as you will. It's not a federal government role, and we should do what we did with welfare. We should cut the program, cap it, freeze it, and give that money back to the states with the flexibility to be able to manage those programs.
Senator, you've described yourself as pro-life, of course, and you also say you want a more limited role for the federal government in Americans' daily lives. Since the Constitution doesn't speak to the authority to regulate abortion, how would you weigh protecting the rights of unborn children through a federal law banning most abortions with respecting constitutional federalism by allowing each state to set its own policy on abortion?
Well, I support a constitutional amendment to ban abortion, if you will, or to stand up for the right to life. That intimately involves the states, as you know, because the constitutional amendment process requires the ratification of that constitutional amendment by the states. And so I've been always a supporter that we need a uniform law on values that undermine our, that undergird our country. That's why I feel very strongly and promoted the federal marriage amendment and forced a vote in the United States Senate when I was there. We can't have 50 definitions of marriage in this country. Family and marriage is too important an institution to have different laws around the country, just like the sanctity of human life is a basic value. It's in our Declaration of Independence, our founding document. The whole heart of American exceptionalism is about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if we can't institutionalize that in our country and in our Constitution, it was in our founding document. I don't think our founders could possibly even envision that we would have a country that would allow this. And that's why they never put it in the Constitution.
I think you've made that clear. Let's try to get to some other questions.
Oh, sure.
Senator, in Florida, it's been very frustrating because, as you've probably heard, I've had to sue the EPA to stop it from imposing absolutely unsustainable water standards on my state, and it would be devastating to businesses in Florida. The Obama administration, they have pursued numerous environmental policies that affect all of us in different ways that would impose staggering costs on the American people. What principles would you follow in deciding whether to approve any environmental regulations?
Well, I would say this, that what we've seen is a radical environmental policy put forward by this administration. But it's based upon some very poorly crafted legislation that is in place right now, which, you have an Endangered Species Act, which is the heart of a lot of the problems that we've dealt with in Pennsylvania. Look at the Central Valley of California, and we've seen these policies because you have deliberately drafted pieces of legislation that are overly broad. And it's not just in the area of the environment. National Labor Relations Act. Now, we've seen the Boeing situation settle in Charleston.
Absolutely.
But here you have a broadly worded statute. This is what the left is the best at. Look at Obamacare. 700 places where you give the Secretary the authority to sort of rewrite the bill.
So what would you do, Senator?
I'm getting at that. What I believe we need to do is, and I've made this a proposal on the road, we have reauthorizations of all these acts that come forward. In a lot of cases, they just straight reauthorize them because they don't want to refight the war again. But what I'll say as president is I won't enforce an act. I won't sign a straight reauthorization. And I won't just continue to enforce an act that hasn't been reauthorized. We will force the Congress to go back and take these very broadly written statutes that allow regulators to run amok, and we will fix them and have Congress make the decision as to what the laws are, not the regulators.
Senator, having served in the Senate, you've experienced firsthand the importance of the separation of powers between the branches of government. Why do you think the founders created a separation of power between the federal and state governments?
Well, they did to protect the rights of the states and the citizens, and they went farther than that. They actually had the way we established the Congress was they had the United States Senate be selected by the states, the state legislatures, instead of the people. So there was a clear intent that the federal government would be very limited and that the states would have, in fact, sort of a belt and suspenders ability to keep power at the state level, which, of course, would also mean that it would be closer to the people, and the people would have more control to be able to keep that power. So we changed that with the 17th Amendment. One of the reasons I'm a strong supporter of the Balanced Budget Amendment is it because, and with a cap on federal spending at 18% of GDP, is because it will guarantee limited government and guarantee states and people being more free.
We're down to our final 2 minutes. We have to keep it exactly that. So okay. I'll turn to Ken.
Senator, President Obama has refused to defend the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, signed into law by Bill Clinton. Constitutionally, why is the president wrong?
Well, first off, the president has an obligation to defend the laws of our country. This was a bill that was passed unanimously. This is a bill that stands up for an institution that's been in place for a long time. But the president's obligation is to enforce the law, and when a law is challenged, his obligation is to step forward and argue that case. In some respects, I'm happy he isn't, because he was throwing the case. He was giving up on it, and he was not making the arguments
you
that
mean
were
they
important.
were rolling over?
They were rolling over. Yeah. And so I'm sort of glad in this case that Eric Holder is not out there defending the Defense of Marriage Act, which I know he doesn't support.
Well, if a court did find it unconstitutional and you were the president, would you stand by that ruling?
No, I would actually try to do whatever I could, both from the standpoint of passing a new law, and I did this in the partial birth abortion case, where the Supreme Court struck down a Nebraska statute on partial birth. I worked with the House of Representatives. We passed a new law, told the court they were wrong in the law. We actually laid out the reasoning, why the court was wrong. We repassed the bill. President Bush signed it. And the court, 5 years after they found it unconstitutional, found almost an identical bill constitutional. I think it's important when the president thinks we are an equal and co-equal branch of government. We have as much right as a Congress and as a president to say what is constitutional as the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court got it wrong, I would push back and fight to have another case brought before them and let them know that they are not the final word.
Senator, quickly.
We have 20 seconds. That's all we have.
Quickly, Senator. Are the courts the ultimate and only arbiter of the Constitution?
Well, I think I answered that question. Absolutely not. And I'm the only one in this field who's actually done something about it. I'm the only one. I've also called for the abolishment of the Ninth Circuit, and I've done so because we have the power to do so, and I'm out of time. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it, Mike.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming off the campaign trail to be here tonight and being with these attorneys.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.
We're going to see Senator Santorum also at the end of the forum. Our final candidate we'll hear from tonight is Senator Rick Santorum. Senator?
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it, and it's great to be with you tonight. You were a great warrior for faith and family on the campaign trail 4 years ago, and I know that everybody has said now that we need to have a truce on those issues here in this campaign, that we need to focus, as we do, on creating jobs and tackling this huge behemoth of a government that is spending too much and driving our country into bankruptcy. Those are absolutely right. But you, Mike, know that what is at the heart of this is America is a moral enterprise, and that we are sick from the inside when it comes to the state of our family and the state of this moral enterprise that is America. When we have thousands of children being aborted still every day, and we see marriage being attacked and falling apart, a truce is really not a truce in this case. It's a surrender. And ladies and gentlemen, I will not surrender the values of this country. I will stand and defend America.
My thanks to all of these candidates, and we will be right back with some final thoughts. Hope you'll stay with us.